Good morning. Let's get going. Retuning Your Firm, episode 38. That's a big number, isn't it? And Francesca's moved with me on 37 of them, so that's amazing. And I've got three fantastic guests today, so I'd like you to introduce to them. Firstly, what are the themes for today? Chemistry. Well, Neil may wonder what the test tubes are for, but the reality is that group chemistry is absolutely fundamental to effective leadership, as we will find out from him shortly. We know that marketing has been ricketing up the agenda at professional firms, but are marketing people briefing the partners properly to take full advantage of that opportunity? And as Susanne puts it, are you actually therefore auditing your marketing team? They might be checking you out, but are you doing it the other way around? And Nick is, well, he has the really great training company and other organizations which mention as well, but a man who has actually, going back to our awards for a minute, was the amazing compere at our awards for a number of years for those that remember him in that role as well. So welcome one and all. Let's just go through the detail as to exactly who we've got on board. So as I said, Susanne Pugsley, who is the founder, managing director and consultant, all three together of PSBD, and up to quite recently was interim roles at a mid-sized law firm. We have Neil Farmer, who is the founder and managing director of Informal Networks Limited, which is, I really wish I'd thought of that name. What a fantastic name for an organization. As we all know, you can have an amazing organization, take one person out of the jigsaw in the middle, and the whole thing falls apart. Nick Davies, as I mentioned, director and co-founder of a really interesting organization, runs with his sister called Tricres. Do check them out. And as I mentioned earlier, Francesca, the global leader, network capabilities of Grant Thornton International, very much our point person, ray of sunshine on a day which is a bit sunny and a bit grey in Hertfordshire, but hope it's good with you guys. And finally, of course, yours truly. So what are we going to talk about? Well, let's just run through the usual slide for those who know the scene already. But what are we actually really focusing on here? How can you retune your firm? How can you make sure you're not just covering the car with a tarpaulin and waiting for the rain to stop, go back on the track? Because guess what? You'll probably get overtaken or worse. So first of all, think big. Lewis Carroll, have you believed 6 impossible things before breakfast? If you haven't, problems. But think small, because you've got to focus on the angle that really resonate with your key audiences. Relationships. What's interesting about the pandemic, and we'll pick it up, I think, in other contexts, is that actually clients have gone to those with whom they have relationships. And that's really very clear from a whole bunch of metrics. So if you are a firm with a really good set of relationships, your financials have probably surprised you how well you've done. Others possibly not the case. But remember that it's about reciprocity. Having an address book is not the same thing as having relationships. Do a campaign, and rather than a one-off. Now that again will convert an audience into a community. And at the end of the day, what do we want? We want to be part of a community. So, sorry, just clear that one. Drop convention. Go for the new ideas and services, because they are absolutely critical to actually doing things differently. Speed is of the essence. We often say that. Focus on assumptions. I'm an accountant. For me, accounting policies are assumptions. Change the accounting policies, change your profits. The same if you're going out and doing your project. Think about the assumptions, articulate them. What is really going on? What's your view of the marketplace that you're approaching? And then as you launch your market testing, and probably I should put when, because most experiments fail in life, as scientists will tell us, when they prove invalid, amend them and pivot in a new direction. And the beauty of that approach is it depersonalizes it. It's not partner X and partner Y fighting in the boardroom table. It's actually about saying, okay, we agreed on that assumption. Guess what? It's invalid. How are we going to now move forward? And lastly, on this set, be entrepreneurial. Keep listening and innovating. And I think anyone who's involved in training will tell you that the key word in that sentence is listening. If you're not listening to your audience, you have a problem. If you're not listening to your clients, you definitely have a problem. And if you're not looking to your staff at a time when corporate culture is really quite hard to sustain, then you have an even bigger problem. And I do think it's in that order, quite frankly. So thanks to Elena Kutsko of Globsec back in April 2020, very prescient lady. So what's going on with the forum? A couple of things here. On Tuesday, we're looking, I mentioned already, corporate culture, esprit de corps. It seems to be top of the agenda for so many firms at the moment, is how much space do we need? That's the physical part of it. And secondly, how are we actually going to sustain the culture when everybody's going to be working at home for a significant chunk of each working week? And nobody really has the answer to that. I think lots of people are trying different things. I suspect it will be a hybrid solution, much as a hybrid workplaces. And the second one that's coming up a little bit further away, but on the 17th of March, if you have a business challenge, and I can't think there's anybody in this audience who doesn't have a business challenge, we've spent a couple of years funded by government, lovely to get some money back, £1 million, and we've come up with some, I think, a very interesting insight, which is that design sprints, sort of a bit, think of it almost like Scrum, if you're familiar with that philosophy, are a very useful and practical way to rethink and resolve business challenges. So we've got 5 professors for half an hour, which is, I've never had quite so many professors in quite a short period of time. And more importantly, 5 really interesting people talking about how this means for different angles, and then a great policy after that. So just a couple of hours on the 17th of March, and it's free because governments fund it, which is even better. And if you're into Remo, 30 minutes of that beforehand. So really good event. So stick that in your diary and find it on the website wherever you want. Second big thing that's going on, I mentioned Nick already as the compare in the past. Managing Partners Forum Awards 2021. You've still got a month to get them in, but people are now beginning to sharpen their pencils. And last week, Andrew Headley and I, he's the chair of judges, put together a short video which had about 100 views already. So obviously it's getting out there. And why does it really matter? Because if there's one year in which management's contribution to the business has been existential, it's the one that's just finishing. The difference between a well-managed firm and a poorly managed firm will be stark, I think, when you look at the financials in due course. And if you missed last week, as you probably heard, Dr. Sarah Hatton, and I'm delighted to say that she's agreed to come back on future shows, because I thought her sleep manifesto was an amazing one, but there's a lot more to mental health than sleep. So she's going to be coming and talk to us when she can escape from COVID-related matters to talk to us about some of the other areas of mental health. And then we also heard from Marcus about red team thinking. So they're all up there, 5-minute presentations for free on the forum website. So check them out because they're really, really good. Okay. So let's move on now to polls. What are we doing today about polls? Well, again, for those who haven't done our polls, just to remind you why we do our polls. This quote from government is verbatim. I don't think we could ask for more thought leadership other than perhaps mentioning that I was a day late in getting them the findings once, and they asked me where they were, which is my definition of thought leadership. But not just the government, the House of Lords put together a report, very interesting report, I think totally ignored by government, but never mind, on the EU relationship on professional business services. Our poll was the only one I think they used other than government data in that 120-odd page report. It's very interesting, but as I said, a bit sad possibly. Moving on now, what happened last week in the poll? This is actually quite interesting. We were looking, if you recall, for those who completed it, at what I call 3 stages. Shakespeare has 7, but this is 3 stages of the people path, if you like. So what's happening in terms of the red one, which is recruitment? What's happening with the green one, which is the employer experience? In other words, the experience that you as an employer provide your employees. And then why do people leave? The blue one. And what's really fascinating about this is that if you look at those 10 columns, it's pretty clear which ones are the most important, and you're only allowed to select 3 in terms of both experience and recruitment, the careers, all to do with colleagues, culture, client base, working arrangements, and career advancement. However, when it comes to leaving, why do people leave? Oh, well, it's the money. Nearly 80% recognition rewards. Now, of course, I know and you know that that's myopia, or some ruder word, because the reality is that people leave when the colleagues, culture, client base, and the other things aren't there or are missing or aren't right for them, and then they use the money as a rather convenient fiction. So this is sort of setting it out in spades, which is quite interesting. Why might that be? Well, part of the problem, going back to the myopia, is if you are using exit interviews as the best way to find out what people feel about working for your firm, which feel is an emotional word, it's the wrong people at the wrong time, quite frankly. And the others, I mean, only 3 of them even go above 50% in terms of the firms. And anyway, it's a bit depressing, but of course, if you're listening to the wrong people, then you may end up with the wrong message. So how are people actually tracking their performance as an employer? We talk a lot about employee engagement, but how much about employer performance? Not enough. Again, voluntary exits up at the top. Only half people are even measuring sickness and absence. I know it's a bit harder in COVID world, but the truth is that you're really not engaging with your people if you're not even aware they're ill. So I'm being a bit tough here, I know, but it is relevant stuff. Okay, so at least people aren't being totally myopic, because they do recognize that their career messages are, only 12% think their career messages are crystal clear. It's a pretty rubbish number, but at least it shows they're not living in a total world of illusion. And equally, if you're looking at key question, are you satisfied that people employment issues, including your internal expert reputation as an employer, receive the necessary understanding, leadership, measurement, urgency, and coherence, which is probably one of the principal objectives of any leadership team. We'll hear a bit more from Neil, I think, on aspects of that. Only 28% are very satisfied. Okay, none of them thinks we have a problem. I think that's probably not true, but the others are in between. Is never a good place to be in life. So what does that mean in terms of practical stuff? And this is, again, looking at what's going on, and this probably won't surprise you. The salary pressure is from the partners and the senior people. The expansion is going to be for the more junior people, and all the people in the business marketing and the analysts and the support teams are neither likely to expand nor are likely to exert any salary pressure, so probably won't be given the same attention. Sad, but that's the way it is. And in terms of how are people going about it, because this is a talk I'm giving, in fact, next week to a really interesting conference for recruiters. Well, even Stevens, between the two obvious usual methods of contingency and exclusively retained, but a fair chunk of people reaching out to their networks. And as some of you may have seen yesterday in various media, internal recruitment teams are beginning to make themselves heard in the professional services. They're quite popular in other sectors, and they're beginning to come through in our sector a bit more. So that's the feedback from last week. So what about this week? Well, this week we're going to be doing the monthly sector tracker, which absolutely goes straight to government. So please complete. I've written below what it covers: business priorities, barriers to performance, issues being discussed at management meetings, movements in your income, activity levels, headcount, new workflow, etc., extent of home working and office space requirements post the pandemic. So fairly sort of standard stuff. We've been tracking it every month for many months. Well, the developing a clear purpose and strategy remains the number one item on the list. Curiously, back in April, it was at the bottom of the list because everybody was thinking of starting up a new business model. Well, that only gets 10% now, I'm afraid. 60% thinking it's about purpose and strategy. People's skills usually come through quite strongly, which they do as always. But increasing operational efficiency, that's the one that's kind of jumped up the group a little bit. I mean, those 4 or 5 tend to be the ones that actually come through fairly high. So that's for that one. Let's move on to the next question. Dip in income, 2/3 none, 27% 10. What might, and 2% more than 30. Well, what you won't remember unless you've looked at the data is that back in April, more than half of you thought it would be more than 30%. Now it's insignificant, and that's a measure of the extent to which the sector has surprised itself at how successful it's been financially over the past 12 months. What about activity? Again, there's a little bit of contraction, but the vast majority are looking at expansion. That again reflects the situation from a week last month. And again, if we're looking at the new work, again, 70+% in the expansion space. In terms of headcount, 50% looking to increase the headcount. I think we had almost nobody looking to increase their headcount a year ago or 9 months ago at the beginning of the pandemic. Working from home, again, no firm is expecting everybody to be back in the office full time. 16% everyone's going to be working from home, and then it fluctuates around about the sort of between 2 and 3 days a week. That's nearer to 3 days a week at home today rather than because the 3/4 is slightly more than the quarter if you look at the numbers. What about changes to the office space? Well, again, nobody's looking for more space. That's kind of an obvious, I think, for the property people. A chunk going about the same, but a big chunk. If you're looking at more than 20, you're looking here at sort of, 60% nearly, no, 50%, sorry, I can't do math, who are saying it's going to be less than 20%. If you're in the property world, that's not good news. I can't really understand why the property investment funds are doing so well, but that's another story. So what's getting in the way? What are the things that are preventing you from performance? Well, the one that jumps out is the economic outlook, which clearly we have no control over. And the second one is the financial health of your clients. I don't think I would have put that on the list a year ago. It wasn't something that even figured. But if you're serving a sector that hasn't got much money. They're happy for you to do the work, but you may not get paid, which isn't a good place to be. And what carries the most weight, and this is where again we've seen marketing go really, really up the list, as I mentioned about Susanne earlier. Finance and cash flow remains the king of the crowd. That's the one that carries the most weight. Marketing comes in at second, and that's ahead of clients, and it's ahead of people, and it's ahead of operations. Now that's not where marketing was a year ago, and the question to the marketing community is, are you taking advantage of that great opportunity to make sure that your plans get the buy-in, because people are going to be more positive towards them, I suspect. This one, Andrew Kakabadze, who is one of our board members, and obviously he monitors 14,000 boards in Henley, and he basically says, yep, those are really, really good stats. 80%, 70%. The only one that's a bit lower is sharing pain. But on the other hand, if firms haven't had much pain, there probably isn't much pain to share. That's one way of thinking about it anyway. So I'm going to stop sharing now, and I shall now invite the first of our guests, which is Susanne, to come and tell us a bit about marketing, and in particular, auditing your marketing teams. Get it the right way around.
Thank you very much, Richard. Thank you for having me along today. Yes, I wanted to talk this morning about something that's close to my heart in terms of, there comes a point in the journey of any firm when they're going from a small firm, up to the mid-market, but that you need to determine whether the BD and marketing function that you have in the business is fit for purpose. Now, COVID has thrown this particular thing even to more sharp relief, as we've seen in the poll there, that there's a lot more emphasis now on fairness, understanding the need for the BD and marketing function and what it does. But taking it back to where that works with a firm that's grown, naturally, organically, and reached that tipping point into mid-market, or whether it's grown fast through a number of rapid mergers, there comes that pivotal point where suddenly things have to change, and we look at how you can't get all your partners around a table and discuss the strategy. You don't know everybody else in the business, and you turn, particularly in an area now where we can't even get around a table because we're all sat in our homes, to look at what are those supporting structures, and are they the right ones for us now? As people grow organically, they often start with the marketing communications part. As we know, it's a main focus on events and PR and communications, and there are definite benefits to making sure you've got your brand ready. Everyone knows who you are. Your reputation is solid in the market. Those you tip and want to grow more and need to have those structures, there needs to be a greater focus on the business development, the sales part, the understanding of the clients, the listening, the engagement, the strategic focus of where you're wanting to get to in terms of your growth, and what's the vehicle you're going to use to get there. And that means having to take a look at what you've got within those teams and determining whether they, in the skill sets they have currently, whether they're going to get you there. And there's so many different ways to approach it, in terms of whether the incumbent, the marketing director, needs to take a step back and have a think very closely with the board of the firm about where they want to be, and determine, obviously, greater emphasis now on digital, greater emphasis on what the knowledge is that we have about clients we can't go out and meet, and our team that you've got that may have grown organically with the firm or have come from different cultures, different organisations, being brought together. Are they working towards that goal, and how are you going to do that? Now, as we know, in any organisation, passions run high in terms of emotional engagement of what particular services they're getting from marketing and BD, and what they want from them. So sometimes it's often better to bring in that external audit function, bring in a consultant from outside who is agnostic, who can sit there and really audit the function and see, you say you're wanting this is your strategic goal, this is what you have, and do these two things marry up, without the added layer of having worked with people for a very long time and knowing them on a deep personal level, and take away that pressure from the internal to create that decision around what the structure should be, and whether people can pivot into these new roles, whether they need much change. And every every firm is different. You know, every culture is different, every appetite, every position on the adoption curve of marketing ED is different and unique to each organisation. So often that external view can be very helpful. Or it's many firms, and I know many of my recruitment consultant friends are telling me this, that across the board, firms are reaching out to say, hire me a new head, get me a new director, they'll fix it all, just bring a new person in. And that is one way to go. That's a lot of pressure on the person, but then they have to come in and they run that audit, they look at what they need. And from experience, I have found a lot of people tend to spend all their money on this new shiny director, and then there's very little left for this team that they want to build and all the tools and the capabilities that you need to make it work. So there, as you say, many ways to do it, but certainly thought about not only by COVID, but by growth itself and where firms want to get to. There is a need to take that step back, look at what you've got, and whether we get where you want to go in terms of your marketing and your business development.
Thanks, Susanne. That was really good. I always remember a story where they said that they brought in one of these shiny new marketing directors, and then the backwoodsman ambushed the budget. So they left after about 6 months. Neil, you're coming to talk to us about really effective leadership and the importance of group chemistry. I'm sorry I didn't introduce you properly. You're sheltering in your holiday home in France, I think is the best way to put it. And you've been there ever since COVID started.
I am indeed. What I'm going to talk about this morning is pretty disruptive. The whole COVID thing has meant we are making this public more rapidly than we planned. But nevertheless, I hope you'll enjoy it, and bear with me if I ruffle a few feathers of major industries along the way. Okay, bit of background. I started a consultancy at Butler Cox in the 1980s. I ended up in charge of their research operations. They were the biggest IT research and consulting and related consulting firm in Europe at the time. I then moved on and set up my own company called Farringdon Forum Club. That lasted 10 years. I sold it to the Gardner Group in the, when did I sell it? Late 1990s. And then went out to try and see whether some of the ideas that we'd come up with in the Farringdon Forum Club actually worked for change in particular, but also for leadership. So we were starting from scratch, really, looking at outside the IT area and just seeing what's gone wrong. Because leadership's in a mess. It has been in a mess for decades. It's anything you look at, just take a few examples. 70% of major change fails in organizations. People dispute the 70, maybe it's 50 to 70, it doesn't matter, it's awful. We've got a situation where people are basically not engaged to any significant degree in many large organizations today. I mean, I think the last figure I saw said something like 30% of the employees were actively engaged in the business. It's rubbish, it's failure. And then as just looking further on, the whole shindig, why do people leave organizations? We covered that partly this morning, but that wasn't the answer I expected, because the research says 75% of people who leave large and medium-sized firms do so because of their manager. Full stop. You're still sitting comfortably. Okay, so basically I set out with some ideas from my old company as to how this would work. And in the early part of the 21st century, the 2000s, I worked on 5 big change programs back to back. The first one was Nationwide Building Society. It was a massive IT implementation exercise costing £150 million. It was delivered on time and on budget using some of the ideas. The second one was at National Savings and Investments, which, by the way, is still a massive case study for effective digital transformation. And I'll refer to that if I have time later as well. The third one was the back office of Lloyd's of London. We ended up with 35% productivity improvement, better morale, etc. at the end of it. The Liverpool City Council put in their first call centre way back then, and again, 30% productivity improvement, better morale, better engagement, all those sort of issues. So if I take it from that point of view, something we were doing in the research we did in the late 1990s was actually right. Something was working. I'll talk about how we did it as we move forward. In essence, there is a real problem with leadership development industry. It's massive. I've seen figures ranging between $20 million and $50 million a year to try and solve the leadership problem. It's not working. And there's one fundamental reason why it doesn't work, and this comes out from vast amounts of work done on it. The reason it doesn't work is that changing behaviors doesn't make real influential leaders. Notice I said leaders, not managers. So if you want real influential leaders, don't look to change behaviors. It's nice to have, your morale will go up and you'll have somewhat better culture, etc. But you won't identify a single influential leader as part of that exercise. If I give a few examples of where we came to that conclusion, because it's hugely controversial. I mean, we're saying a $20 billion plus industry is based on SAM. Now, the 3 tests, about 7 or 8 tests we used in the end, just try and identify why behavior doesn't generate really effective leaders. And we asked three fundamental questions, really. Basically, what we were saying was that the idea is very seductive. If you're looking at leadership and you're a young, ambitious, bright individual in a large organization, and the organization says to you, it'd be great, we'll develop you, we'll actually put you through, the key thing we're going to do is change your behaviors, make you much more effective as a leader and a manager. And you can do that and you can succeed. Anybody can succeed having your basic skills and intelligence. And because it's not true, you end up with all of disillusion, etc., etc. First test we used in terms of why behaviors don't count is we identified from our network analysis that only 1 manager in 6 is an effective leader. And this is off a sample of 16 organizations and 50,000 employees going through our tests. 1 in 6. If you had decades of spending $20 billion a year plus trying to create effective leaders, you'd expect it to be a bit more than that. The second one is asking the fundamental question of any manager. If you've been around for a while, you've actually managed more than one group of people. And in that situation, we just ask the question, have you found a difference between those groups in terms of how effective your leadership is, forget your management skills, how effective, what sort of response? Do people come to you for advice? Do they interact? And there's some groups much easier than others to do that sort of thing. And the answer again is generally yes. Now think about it. If you have these people with superb behaviors, you'd expect to be able to actually have 50, 60, 70% of them being effective leaders. You'd expect that they wouldn't answer yes to that question in terms of, do you find differences in different groups? They have the behaviors that should work everywhere. It doesn't work that way. And the final one is looking at when people leave. The one I mentioned earlier, 75% of them leave because of their manager. These are the people who actually leave. And the reason that we looked at this, and the reason we talk about chemistry in groups, is that if you think of having personal chemistry, which is hugely complicated, it refers to all your experiences through life, at work and outside of work. and you have a personal chemistry. The group or the team you're working with has a number of personal chemistries, but there's also a group chemistry. It's some combination of which person would those people choose as the person that influences them most in their work. And if you apply the tests I've just described to those chemistries, you'll find you'll nod against all of them. Because the chemistry of the individual and the group is a random choice virtually. So you wouldn't expect 40, 50, 60, 70, 80% of them to be influential leaders. Tick that one. The second one, you would expect, as you move from job to job or from group to group, that the ability to be an effective leader would change, vary. It does. And I'll leave it at that. I hope it's not too controversial this morning.
No, and I think what's interesting, Neil, is that, of course, remember that the survey I did was asking employers what they thought were the reasons that people leave. So the myopia, when they think it's all about the money, is proven twice over. Right. I'd now like to invite Nick, who, of course, is, if at one level, a representative of the training industry. I don't think he'd really think of himself that way with his training style being what it is. But Nick, come and give us your thoughts on training in particular and some of the things possibly that you've just heard from Neil around the importance of context and chemistry.
Yeah, thank you. It was very interesting, Neil. Thank you very much indeed. Before I got into training, you know this, Richard, is that I was director of a recruitment business up here in Scotland with my sister, Rebecca. She recruited accountants and I recruited lawyers. And you can imagine in that 6 years when I was director at the company, I interviewed an awful lot of lawyers who were coming to me because they wanted to look for another job. And it's amazing actually how many of them, when you first ask them, so why are you looking for a move? They go, oh, well, I want more money. Then you'd actually get talking to them and listen and really, really listen. And it was very, very, very rarely about money. It was about recognition is what it was about. And you know, I have said this to partners in the past. If you just spent more time, right, just saying to your people, listen, I really appreciate the work that you're doing at the moment. I know you've had to cancel some social engagements. I know you realise this is not a 9-to-5 job. It's not why you came into law, but I just want you to know that hasn't gone unnoticed and I really appreciate it. I said, you'd save a fortune on bloody recruitment if you just did that. But it is the simple answer as just go, oh, well, it's money. And it's not. And the expression I'd heard, and I didn't realise it was borne out in proper research, was that people don't leave jobs, they leave bosses. And that's certainly on the occasions when I've been employed, it was about 4. That's exactly why I've left jobs, because I thought he was a hateful idiot. And so you just go. Training. My business dropped off a cliff in March, as all my clients in professional services all made sure that all their people, rightly, were all set up with the right IT and that they could work from home and everyone was joined up and everyone knew how to use MS Teams and Zoom and everything. And then they did lots and lots of mental health awareness, making sure all their people were okay, everyone was all right. Then lots of resilience training. These are not things that I do, by the way. And then it started to pick up in the summer. For me, and actually in the autumn and into the winter, it was quite busy, refreshingly busy, surprisingly busy. And actually this year has started off quite incredibly with people just getting in touch with me going, we want you to do this. Can you do this? Can you put a proposal together for this? The bulk of my work is communications training, all sorts of things, negotiation skills, presentation skills, business development, etc. But of course, everybody wants those skills because they're really, really important, really, really important. As Susanne was saying about BD, it's just essential because, you know, it's very competitive market out there. Well, it isn't less competitive, that's for sure. And also people want to have a slant with, okay, that's fine. We've got to continue negotiating. We've got to continue influencing, persuading. But how on earth do we do that in a virtual world And so I had to, and I noticed that number 7, Richard, on your first sort of list, bullet point list that you went through, that the last point was about innovation. I think I wrote it down here somewhere that was about innovation and listening. And quite early on, it was about May last year, I thought, right, I need to flex, I need to adapt my courses to reflect this virtual world, because, and the poll is very interesting, even when we do go back to normal, I think a lot more professional services, negotiations, business development, BD meetings, etc., will be through a virtual environment. So people within professional services firms have to improve these skills no matter what happens, so they can do it in person and they can do it like this. So I have adapted. You'll probably notice, Francesca said right at the beginning when I came on into the green room at the beginning, she said, "Oh, you're very tall." And I just didn't have the heart to tell her that I was actually standing up, which I thought was obvious. But this is an important point. I stand up when I'm training. I do this for 2 reasons. One, because if I was doing it in person, I'd be standing up. And therefore it tells my brain, oh, Nick, you must be working. I also wear a shirt, right? Because I've got nothing on below the shirt, by the way. But I wear a shirt because again, I must be working if I'm wearing a shirt, right? And also, so it gives me more energy, standing up, much more energy. But more importantly, and this is the bit that I really want to end with, is that's so important when you're delivering a presentation, and delivering training is a presentation, is it's better for my audience. It's better for my delegates. Why? Because I can generate more energy by standing up. They can also see half of my body. The trouble with the virtual world is all we've seen is this of most people, is what we've done. So we're missing out on a huge amount of non-verbal communication, but at least they can see my hands. And ordinarily we'd be in a classroom and they would be seeing my hands. So it's better for them. And this is always important when one's delivering a presentation. I always say to clients, the single most important thing when you're delivering a presentation / training is your audience. That it's all about them and it's not about you. And what's really important is you have to consider where your audience are. And I don't just mean physically, which many of them are sitting on the end of their beds, bless them, with little laptops open. But I just mean that when they come to one of my courses, when they log on, I am, one of many people that they will have interacted with through a screen. Okay, and chances are all those interactions they will have just with people been here. Okay, and they'll have been very one-dimensional. We miss out on so much communication through this virtual medium here, that I have to make sure that when I deliver, that this is really, really engaging. I'll finish with this little story. About 10 years ago, I was asked to speak at a knowledge management conference. I know. I mean, my mum said if I worked really hard, that one day, right, I'd be living the dream. But in my wildest dreams, did I ever expect to be speaking to 150 knowledge management people? Unbelievable. But I was given the topic. They said, we want you to come and talk at our conference, Nick, for 45 minutes. I said, okay, what do you want me to talk about? And they said, we want you to talk about how to get your workforce engaged in training. I went, okay. So what's the background to that? So, well, a lot of people in knowledge management, so that would like librarians and PSLs in law firms, accountancy firms, a lot of them have to deliver training. And, to bring people, the lawyers, the accountants up to speed with what's going on, black letter law, etc. And then they find it very difficult to get engagement in the training. And I went, okay, I'll speak about that. So I got onto this stage, huge stage, right? And they put the title of my talk, massive screen here. And it said, how to get your workforce engaged in training. And I read it, which I don't normally do. I don't like to read from PowerPoint slides because my audience can read. And I went, how to get your workforce engaged in training. Make your training engaging. And then I walked off. Now, I was contractually bound to speak for longer than that, So I did go back on. But the point was made. If you want to get your people engaged in training, and they need it more than ever, you need to make sure your training's engaging, really engaging. That's how I'd like to finish off. Thank you, Richard.
Thank you. Francesca, if I can interrupt your laughter for a second, come and tell us a little bit about today and what you've been hearing.
Oh, I just love that. Funny enough, a long time ago, I was asked to do a talk around what's exciting in tax. And actually, I am a tax person, so that's slightly less dull than it might appear. And I was so tempted to just go on stage, stand there and go, quite a lot, and walk off. But I didn't have the same bravery, Nick. I wish I had. Just everything really today has been quite fascinating. There's something I think in Susanne's talk that I think really resonates from many of the areas we've got at the moment, is that whole piece around taking the moment to take a bit of distance. There's so many quotes around this, aren't there? The one I always love is, things are much clearer from a distance. You can't see what the outside of a building looks like when you're sitting inside. That kind of concept, that this is the perfect opportunity to take that little look back and go, actually, what are we really trying to do here? And at the moment, I'm in the throes of doing a strategic plan. You know how much fun they are. But a lot of that is about stepping back and just going, actually, we've done this thing and it served us well under an old model, but does it still make any sense? And often it's the stuff you stop doing that's much more important than the stuff you start doing. So that really resonated. Oh, and Neil, what a lovely challenge that is. All that work we've done. What a waste of time that was. I do love it when people really challenge things that we've done endlessly. I can't begin to tell you how many leadership courses I've been on. And I'm a little bit nervous about your point about do I have different interactions with different groups? And I think anyone answering honestly would probably go, yeah, that's fascinating, and I'd love to know how to put that right. Maybe you'll probably get about 3 seconds at the end from Richard, but it'd be lovely to hear your thoughts on what you do about that. And of course, you know what, Nick? One of the many things I love about the fact that, when you just say, "Oh, my business just fell off a cliff." Well, for most people, they wouldn't be standing up. They'd be in a fetal position on the floor at the moment. So there's something really compelling about what you can do around that energy piece. And then also around, it doesn't matter who you are talking to, but actually having some energy. And I think probably like most people on this call, I'm spending a lot of time on calls at the moment. And that headshot, it's a little bit like watching the news, isn't it? Or if you're really old, you might remember a wonderful book called Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. I recommend it to any inner hippie out there. And the writer there said, if you're riding a motorbike, you're actually seeing the world. If you're in a car, you're looking for a TV screen. And I wonder if there's a piece there about how you mix up the different things you do in a day. So if you have got calls, why not just do a good old-fashioned telephone call to break it up? Why not do a very different kind of meeting just to get that energy and variation? Because I'm with you, Nick, energy is everything in these kinds of interactions. So hugely compelling, all three. Thank you.
Wonderful. Yeah, and it's quite interesting because my daughter bought herself one of these totally collapsible desks. It kind of up here, but it then goes absolutely flat. You can put it in a briefcase almost, and you just set it up, and then all of a sudden you can stand, and your laptop's in the right place, and life's very easy. And it's £50 or something trivial. So yeah, it's not even the props that's the issue, as Nick says. Anyway, perhaps Susanne, just picking up really there, and really sort of taking on the point that Francesca was making about stepping back, and if you're in the inside of the house, you can't really see the outside. I mean, where does the leader start in your view? Where would the leader start if they think that's the right agenda to go for?
I think it starts with some rather brutally honest questions of themselves, which is often not an easy place to start. And the kicker that kicks these things off is normally when they start doing their strategic reviews, which we all love so much, and thinking, having that navel gazing moment of who are we and where do we want to be in 5 years and what are we trying to achieve, and only when you start to unpick that does the leadership have to say to itself, can we do this ourselves, or do we need help? And I kind of equate it to my own personal journey over the last 6 months, where I'm desperately trying to lose weight from lockdown 1. and have been doing it alone because I'm like to think I'm an intelligent person who knows what I should and shouldn't be eating or drinking. But no, and I had to say, no, I need help. And I went out and got a nutritionist, and it's worked. And I think that's what I say to the leadership of firms that I work with is go, yes, you can do it on your own, but are you? Do you need to think about reaching out and finding an external viewpoint on it?
It's also about having a companion on the journey, I always think, because it's in a journey that you will be experiencing, and actually you do really want a buddy along the way. They may not, you're sort of your best friend that is always. There's a lovely quote where they say that, why does the athlete take so much rubbish from the coach? Answer: because the athlete knows that the coach is acting in their best interests. Why do so many people not take rubbish from their leader? ... Famous quote. Neil, just talking about leadership for a minute, and I'm just wondering the extent to which it gets so granular that people kind of find it very hard to come up with anything which is structured. I mean, if every group of people has its own unique DNA, and therefore you have to adapt your style, I think that's probably the right word, to that particular context. How can you do that? I mean, how do you actually go about becoming an effective leader in that type of context?
You don't. Essentially, the chemistry determines who the real leaders are. And identifying the real leaders in the organization is very easy. You do an informal network analysis, you ask the question, who influences whom, and other similar questions, and you end up with a wonderful chart with arrows and little circles that says, this person got 47 nominations and this person got 3. Who do you reckon the leader is? It doesn't tell you in advance who they're going to be. It doesn't tell you why they're the effective leaders. It just tells you who they are. It changes the whole perspective of how you approach leadership as opposed to management.
Wonderful. And so having, if you like, done that chart, picking up Nick here, you've done your chart and you've got these leaders, and now you want to sort of shine the jewel. You want to sort of enhance their raw skills and make them even better. What would you do, Nick, as in wearing your training hat?
What I'm finding at the moment from L&D managers is that one of the benefits of lockdown is that lawyers have got less excuse not to attend training. And in the main, there are exceptions. I mean, if you get 20 people signing up to a training course, you're probably not going to get 20. That's just not possible because, work comes up and file notes need doing and all kinds of stuff like that, and calls from clients. But in the main, what we found is that uptake is better. I think for 2 reasons. One, they don't have to physically move where they used to have to move from their desk, which might be on floor 1, and go to the training floor on floor 5. I know that's not a huge amount of distance, but lawyers will use any excuse just to carry on sitting at their desks. Anyone in professional services, I think, understands that. So they are there. And also, actually, and it touches on what I was saying earlier on, it's actually quite a nice little bit of respite in amongst a day, which will just be head down, doing lots of quite formal Zoom conversations, either with internal colleagues or clients, and there's a little bit of an oasis of sort of 90 minutes, 2 hours, where it's work related, but it's about them and improving their skills, and I think they find that quite beneficial. And again, going back to what Francesca was saying, which she was reiterating what I said, is that's why it's even more important for it to be different from what they've seen all day. The other thing, just a final point on this, is the other thing that's changed is whereas I used to deliver training either in blocks of half a day or a day, that very, very quickly changed. You can't expect people to sit in front of this screen for 3 hours. It's very, very draining for me. And it's harder. It's even harder for them. So it's come between sort of 90 minutes and 2 hours. And again, if you put enough energy and passion into it, you can keep people's attention for 2 hours. I tend to give people a little 6-minute break, as I did yesterday. with people, just time it. But so short and sharp and lots of content rich and very tailored as well. I mean, I've never been a one for going, right, well, I'm going to talk to you about negotiation skills here. There are 35 slides. You know, normally what I'd be doing face to face is with a flip chart going, right, I'm here. We've got 3 hours together. I'm going to talk about negotiation. What is it you want to know? What do you struggle with? What are you worried about? What are your questions or concerns? Well, that was important face to face. I think that's even more relevant to do tailored training now. So yesterday, when I was doing negotiation with some 3 to 4 year PQE lawyers, I go, right, we've got 2 hours together. Negotiation's a massive subject. What do you want to know? What do you worry about? Well, Nick, how do you do this? And how do you do that? And how do you do that? And then when they leave, they go, do you know, actually, that was well worth 120 minutes of my time. That's what's really important. Even more important is tailoring it for them.
Yeah, and interesting, if you think back to a group called the Mind Gym, which has done really well, they always had the basic premise that no training session should last more than 90 minutes in any context. And they built all these little short, and that was in a face-to-face world. So as you say, in an online world, even more so. Right, we're at that final point, I think. So Francesca, do you have any final thoughts before we wrap up for today and look forward to next week?
Yeah, well, maybe just to build on that last point is I don't think any meeting should ever take longer than 90 minutes, never mind learning, because I don't think our brains can take it. But isn't there so much in the learning environment we should take into our day-to-day meetings? You know, thinking about the presentation, keeping it snappy, keeping people engaged, varying the style, bringing some energy, because I don't know about you, but if I have to sit on another 3-hour Zoom call with everybody just nodding there and sort of sneaking off to get cups of coffee, you know, we just can't do that. And we need to get better and better. Now we're in a virtual world.
Yeah, well, I think that's right. And what more can I say other than sadly, we are at that witching hour and it's time to say thank you to our panel. Today's panel have been amazing. Thank you, Susanne, for telling us about the importance of stepping back and doing a little bit of an audit occasionally. Thank you for Neil for sharing the importance of context and chemistry and tracking who people are seen as being the informal natural leaders, irrespective of seniority within the firm. And thank you for Nick for reminding us that standing up is actually a really good way of sharing energy. So thank you for that. And thank you, Francesca, for, as usual, giving us that amazing summary as we went along. For those of you who missed previous episodes, they're all in the management library, as usual. And that includes the poll, so the little heart there about employee engagement, which is always nice imagery, I always think. So it only remains to say thank you. Hope you found today valuable. Please encourage your peers to book for future episodes of the show. And back next Friday. And next Friday, we have Jeremy coming back. We have Claire Mason from Man Bites Dog, which is an interesting way around. And Darshita Gillis, who's doing some really interesting things around social investment and philanthropy. So a few other new topics to think about. And only remains for me to say thank you very much for being a great audience. Thank you so much for completing the poll. It will be with government in the next day or two. And look forward to catching up next week and have a wonderful day in the meantime. Bye for now.